everybody, this is Mr. Wagstaff here. Cool stuff to talk about today. Today, we're going to be talking about the gold rush of 1849. We're going to talk about some boom towns, some ghost towns, and then this thing called the Compromise of 1850, which is going to build on what we talked about yesterday and going to skyrocket tensions in the United States over slavery. All right, so let's go ahead and get started and take a look at what we got today. Cool stuff. So let me put myself up here in the corner a little bit. Now today, at this first start, we're talking about the gold rush. I got the notes there for you. This is going to look a little different than what the notes look like. And that's completely fine. The questions, everything matches up. It's just I simplified it for the notes today. So the gold rush of 1849. All right, this is the first thing we're going to talk about today. So there's this dude, John Sutter. All right. He lives out in California. This is newly acquired land that we have from Mexico with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo from the Mexican-American War that we talked about yesterday. So it's 1848. This guy named James Marshall works for John Sutter. He goes out to the creek. Now, there's like 800 people that live in California. The only city that really exists there at the time is San Francisco. There's like nobody there. So this guy, James Marshall, goes down to the creek and finds a huge hunk of gold just in the creek. And they're like, holy crap. So he comes up, and this is where it is. I mean, San Francisco's down here, but the whole region was called San Francisco. So James Marshall says he reached his hand down and picked it up. It just made my heart jump. I was certain it was gold. All right. So, like, it's not fool's gold. Now keep in mind, America has spent like our entire existence trying to find gold from Jamestown on, and they're like, I guess there's no gold here. To just all of a sudden just find it. It's like in a creek. Like, he didn't have to dig for it. He just saw it. Like, oh, it's a big old, instantly rich. All right. So they tried to keep it a secret at first. But what ends up happening is, like, ooh, we have our own little gold area. They go out there, like, the next day, and there's somebody else out there it's like, gold. It's a Spanish-speaking guy, so it's oro, which is Spanish for gold. I guess. I'm not bilingual. So he's letting them know that it's gold. So it lasts about a day before everybody figures out there's gold in the region. Even though this was on his land, there is gold everywhere it appears. All right? Now, as soon as they discover gold, what's going to happen is somebody's going to be like, gold? And I imagine the word gold from California, which is on the West Coast, is going to filter all the way over the United States and land in the ears of the poor people on the East Coast. And they're like, gold? Now keep in mind, vast majority of people are poor. Yeah, you have your plantation owners that are rich in the South. You have your factory owners that are rich in the North. Those people, we have talked about them. The vast majority of people are dirt poor. The idea that you could just pack up, move across the country, because America is a mobile society, get to the West Coast, find rocks in the ground, and your entire life fundamentally changes because now you're rich. Tons of people are going to pack up the wagons and start flying across the country as fast as possible. Takes them about a year. So gold was originally found in San Francisco in 1848. By 1849, there's just a massive influx of people coming in. 80,000 gold seekers called 49ers, because it's 1849, come into California hoping to strike it rich. So the vast majority were American. There were obviously Mexicans coming in because it's just above Mexico. The vast majority are Americans flooding into California. Now, remember what type of Americans are showing up. Rich ones or poor ones? Poor Americans. Rich people who are already rich over on the East Coast probably aren't going to risk life and limb traveling Indian country in the middle of the country to go get more rich. But people who have nothing and are like, don't know how they're going to get the next meal, they're the ones that race over. So this is an actual photograph. We're getting some original cameras, so you start getting some photographs. This had to be colored in afterwards. There's 0% chance they have any type of color photography. It was called Gold Fever, man. Now, keep in mind, the people who are showing up already want gold, and it is incredibly incredibly contagious. That's all people wanted was gold. Like, forget everything else. Let's get after it. And it became an obsession for a lot of people there. So much so it was referred to as this like sickness. You got gold fever. Like, you're not going to eat, you're not going to sleep. You're just going to look for gold. And a lot of people get sick. They do dumb stuff, get themselves hurt. Just in this desperate attempt to try to find gold. Now, gold mining equipment. They used to do field trips like this in elementary school. You go to these rivers, you dump your stuff in here, you spread it out, and this is how they were finding the gold. It wasn't huge rocks like they found it at the first. It was just specks, but it really added up. And there were people who made considerable money from it. This I really thought was cool. Two things I want to talk about here. So you can't see it at the top here. It says gold mining required very strong pants as miners constantly ripped their pants. So Levi Strauss invented jeans. So Levi jeans come from the gold rush. This is where it originated from. I should also point out that the people who made the most money, like money that like still exists, like they made like legit money off of the gold rush, were not the people who found gold. There were people who found gold and made it rich, but they usually just turned around and spent it. It's the people who, like Levi's, who made a product that the gold diggers, literally, that the gold diggers would want to buy. So Levi's is a known brand, but the people who sold shovels and pans, they made crazy money. You could buy a shovel over on the East Coast for about $1. You show up on the West Coast and need a shovel, $25. You know why? Because people will buy it. But you have to have a shovel to look for gold. The people who actually made most of the money were people who sold supplies to the gold diggers. Stuff like shovels, stuff like Levi Strauss is selling blue jeans that everybody wanted. This type of stuff drastically made those people very rich, like lasting wealth. So this is Levi's, and now they literally come. You can get blue jeans pre-destroyed. Seems kind of odd. Chinese immigrants start coming into the United States on the West Coast, really starting with the gold rush. But we will talk about the Chinese immigrants more as we get in. While the Irish immigrants were accepted for the most part, even though they got some hostility, the Chinese immigrants are going to get a lot more racist blowback to them throughout the 1800s, and we'll talk more about that as we move on. You can see, like in this picture, there are Chinese immigrants that are coming in looking for gold. Chinese harsh working conditions, discrimination. So, boom towns. All right. So you can't see it at the top. It says boom towns here. Towns that grew up near major mining sites. Really are just across the country. As people are like walking across the country, somebody thinks he sees something shiny in a rock and they're like, hey, think I found gold. And then boom, like a town appears. That's why it's called a boom town. Don't you like how I did that? Like boom, town appears. And everybody's there is desperately looking for gold, either until they find out there is no gold there, or that they choose not to, or they run out of gold. And then so the town just springs up like almost overnight. And this is a picture of a boom town, like poof, like it's not real nice at all. And it springs up overnight, and it's there for a couple months until either, again, they run out of gold or they realize there's no gold there and everybody moves on. And that boom town turns into a ghost town, so this is the closest thing you get to a picture of a ghost town, of just an abandoned town. So you could like literally just walk into a town and there's nobody there. But this is probably a little nice to be what an actual ghost town looked like. Like this thing, you walk up on this and it's like abandoned and you're like, nah, like it's not like anything I want here. So this would be a boom town, and then a ghost town is just a town that's left and everybody has moved on and the town is just empty and there's nobody there. It's kind of creepy. This is a picture of another ghost town. And that one was in Colorado, which is over here. So people are hitting these ghost towns as they're going across the country. So this is where people are headed to. They're moving out over here. Even though by this point, this land is controlled by America, they're still figuring out the final organization of it. But you can see people are coming across the country. This is extremely dangerous. The Donner Party is the famous one that gets caught in the mountains in a snowstorm. And they survive, or like one of them does, because they ate all the other people. And it's the Donner Party, and it's one of the more famous things that happened in American history of just how awful the frontier can be. If you're at the wrong place at the wrong time, you get snowed in and you're stuck on top of a mountain with no food or supplies with your family, you know, I'm not going to eat you, and then you die, and you're like, I mean, they're just sitting there, like, might as well, you know, it's just crazy to imagine. But the Donner Party, this is during the gold rush in the trails to the west. So that brings us to the Compromise of 1850. This is where tensions over slavery are going to skyrocket, and California is going to play a big part in that. Because of the gold rush, now there's a bunch of people in California. Since there's so many people in California and it was a territory, California wants to become a state. Everybody's like, great. So the majority of California is below the 3630 line. So what should they have the ability to be? Be a slave state. So the South is like, yes, the plan is coming together. We absolutely cannot wait for California to join as a slave state, and then slavery can expand. But here's where it gets weird. California asked not to be a slave state. And it's going to get really, really, really tense. And we'll get to that in a second. All right. So I want to talk about Zachary Taylor here for a second. He's like, what? Zachary Taylor? We just talked about him, all right, yesterday. He was the head general in the Mexican-American War, in a war that we won. When you're the head general in a war that you win, guess what typically happens to you? You become president. So Zachary Taylor is elected president in 1848. So Zachary Taylor is the guy who is around when this fiasco or this tension is going to start skyrocketing. Now, granted, you could have had literally anybody in office and it wouldn't have made any difference because tensions are going to rise. So California asks to be a free state. All right. And so let me show you a map here. Now, who's going to be furious that California has asked to be a free state? That's the South. Because the South, all here in the blue, they want California to also be blue, to be a slave state. So all the blue means it's slave states. California asked to be a free state. They're like, actually, we want slavery to be outlawed here. Now, why do you think that is? The reason is, who made up California? Poor people. Poor people looking to go get rich. If they allow slavery in California, here's the biggest fear of the people in California. It's not that they're on a moral high horse and they're like, oh, we don't want slaves because that's morally reprehensible. They're like, we don't want some plantation owner bringing 100 slaves out here, all searching for gold, finding the gold, and then giving it to him and making the rich guy, the guy who could already afford slaves, make him even richer. So California is like, we actually want to be a free state. We want to outlaw slavery altogether so that it's every man for himself out here, and the slaves aren't forced to go do the work for rich people. So when California asks to be a free state, really ticks off the South. All right, the South is like, no, all right, we don't want that. And so the North and the South aggressively fight over this. The North is like, that is wonderful. So the North here, all right, is feeling pretty outnumbered now with all of this land here that is below the 3630 line and can get divided up. That is one of the reasons Texas is such a huge state. It is the largest state in the continental United States. Alaska is absolutely enormous, but slavery was done by that, so it didn't have any deal with the size. When Texas asked to join, Texas was told they had to remain one state, one really large state, because the last thing the North wanted was to let Texas join, break up into like 5 different states, and then you have 5 more slave states that all get representation in the government. So that's why Texas is so big, is that they were allowed to join under the understanding that they will remain one state and won't, like, you know, force their power on everybody else. So California wants to be a free state. So Everybody starts arguing. There's this guy, Henry Clay. Shocker, Henry Clay, known as the Great Compromiser. He's going to come back out, and he is once again going to come up with a compromise that appears to be making both sides happy on paper. So here's what he comes up with that's supposed to make both sides happy. Number one, yes, California gets to come in as a free state, all right? And the South is like, oh, that's some bull crap. We don't want that, all right? Then they're like, okay. Then, all right, Texas has to release Arizona for like $10 million or something like that, which is really ridiculous when you look back on it, that we had to pay ourselves $10 million to release ourselves from ourselves. But whatever. Texas is like, this is mine. And the United States is like, it's not yours. You're a state. You don't get to like control another state. And Texas is like, yeah, I do. And they're like, here's some money, Texas. Let it go. And Texas is like, okay, I like money. Perfect reenactment of what just happened. All right. So Texas, that doesn't really tick anybody off. Then New Mexico and Utah get to decide for themselves. And it's a term we'll start talking more about called popular sovereignty. All right. Popular sovereignty is a big fancy term that means the people get to decide for themselves. So the people in New Mexico and Utah get to vote on whether they want to be a slave state or a free state. Now, this ticks off the South because, like, New Mexico is mainly below the 36-30 line right here. So they should be required to be a slave state, or at least, be forced to. So this is a win for the North. The North is like, yes, awesome. So the North already has 2 wins out of the Compromise of 1850. They got California as a free state, and New Mexico and Utah get to decide for themselves. They're not required to be a slave state. So you gotta throw a little, got to throw some crumbs here for the South. So the thing that the South gets in exchange for all the other stuff is something called the Fugitive Slave Act. People's brains explode over this. The Fugitive Slave Act says from now on, and this is part of the Compromise 1850, any escaped slave that makes it to the North. Keep in mind, the North at this point absolutely horrified by slavery. It's increased, tensions are arisen. It's 1850. By 1861, the Civil War is going to start. We're a decade from the war, and tensions are just going to rise. So right now, the people in the North hate the idea of slavery. If a slave escapes to the North, Northerners are now required by law to go grab any escaped slave that they see. All right? And with their own time, money, and effort, take that slave back down south and return it to its plantation. Otherwise, the Northerner can be arrested and thrown in jail. All right? It's called the Fugitive Slave Act. It requires all the people in the North to return escaped slaves. You are now requiring Northerners to be complicit in an institution that they feel like is evil. All right? Because it is evil. So this absolutely horrifies the North. So this is part of the Compromise 1850. The South loves the Fugitive Slave Act. All right, the South is like, absolutely. This is like an insurance policy on your slaves. Your slaves take their slaves, or so your slaves take their slaves. The South takes the Underground Railroad, escapes north, or slaves take the Underground Railroad and escapes north. Let me talk today. When they get to the North, they're like, home free. Then they can be grabbed and taken back down south. This is awful. What also ends up happening, a little side story on this, and this is crazy because this happened multiple times. Free black people in the North were grabbed by Southerners in the South and brought down south as escaped slaves to find more slaves. Absolutely, the movie 12 Years a Slave is based on pretty much on that situation of free people in the North, free black people in the North just being captured and taken down south and sold into slavery under the guise of, I'm just returning escaped slaves. Awful. But the North was furious at the Fugitive Slave Act. It is really shocking that it got passed, but it is. We're going to talk about the repercussions of that. I always like to put this little poster up here. So the North is trying to be helpful, and this is like, caution, colored people of Boston. They're trying to say, hey, slaves, if you catch up here, do not talk to anybody. You're not safe. Keep going to Canada. Keep going to Canada. people will arrest you and turn you in. So the people who are like required to do this a lot of times are police officers. So if you're an escaped slave and you get to the North and you see a sign that you know has something to do with you, but you haven't been allowed to learn how to read. So guess who you ask to read it to you? Probably the nearest police officer on the corner, like, sir, what does this say? And then he's like, yeah, I just escaped from down south. Like posting signs like this could actually be more detrimental to helping the slaves in freedom than actually encouraging them not to talk to people so they don't get captured. You don't need that picture. All right. So the compromise is passed. The North is fear. Like every step that leads up to 1860, 1861 pushes you closer to violence. All right. And the reason that is because it keeps forcing morality on one side or the other. And the Fugitive Slave Act absolutely violated the moral compass of the North by requiring them to return slaves, an institution that they vehemently, I can't even pronounce that word, strongly disagreed with. So John C. Calhoun, if you remember this dude, this old John C. Calhoun, this is the guy who said that John C. Calhoun was the vice president under Andrew Jackson who said, we're not going to pay that tax. And Andrew Jackson threatened to hang him from the first tree. Same guy. He's still in the government. And John C. Calhoun, who loves the Fugitive Slave Act, loves it, thinks it's great. He's from the South, loves it. But he's like, man, this might be the point of no return. So even though he likes it, he realizes by forcing the North to do something that is against their moral compass, tensions are just going to skyrocket from this point forward. All right. So, politics at the time. Zachary Taylor, I shouldn't laugh. Zachary Taylor dies in office. It's been one of the biggest mysteries of all time. How did Zachary Taylor die? So 2 years in office, he dies. All right. So people swore he was poisoned for like 100 years. What had happened was he went outside. It was like a 90-something degree day. And he eats a big bowl of cherries and curdled milk. Like chunky milk. Oh, like, you're the president. Get some fresh milk. Anyway, he gets like really, really bad food poisoning and dies. All right. Well, Zachary Taylor wasn't necessarily liked in Washington, D.C., but when Zachary Taylor dies, sorry, I'm on a cough bust today. When Zachary Taylor dies, a lot of people believe he was poisoned with arsenic because his symptoms of food poisoning looks like he had arsenic poisoning. For like 100 years, if you find a history book from about 50 years ago, they'll talk about that. They do think he may have been assassinated. The mystery's not solved. Here, I believe in the 70s or 80s, they were actually able to have the technology. They actually dug up his remains. They, because there's stuff that arsenic would leave in the body if he was poisoned with arsenic, and they were able to look at his cadaver, what was left of it, and determine 100% he was not poisoned. He just drank some really bad milk and got sick and died. So when Zachary Taylor died of food poisoning for eating cherries and curdled milk in the summertime, all right, his vice president Millard Fillmore takes over for him, who is also a Whig, is a political party at the time. Millard Fillmore, if you've ever heard of him, it's only because people make fun of him for being the most useless president ever. People didn't like Zachary Taylor as a president, and that man was a war hero. When Millard Fillmore takes over for him, they're like, nobody could agree on anything. Nobody's going to let him be the compromiser. Millard Fillmore's probably one of the most worthless presidents we've ever had. Not going to say he's a bad person, but people didn't like Zachary Taylor, and he was a war hero. So when Zachary Taylor dies and his vice president takes over, who has the same politics as Zachary Taylor, but not a war hero, they just ignored him. Important here, nativism is back. We'll reference it in almost every unit from most of U.S. history, which is the idea that native-born Americans should be treated better than immigrants. So nativism doesn't want immigrants treated the same as people that are born here. It's just like racism against immigrants. So much so, there's actually a political party that comes out called the Know Nothings. Now, the Know Nothings are important in history for a couple of reasons. Number one is because they couldn't join another political party because guess what everybody else wants to argue about? Slavery. That's all they talked about is slavery, slavery, slavery. So the Know Nothings are like, hey, slavery's all good and bad, but good and fine and all. Y'all can argue over that all you want. But you know what the real problem is with America? Immigrants. So all the people who are anti-immigrant, nativist, think native-born people should be treated better than foreigners, they get together and create their own political party, all right? And they call their political party the Know Nothings, all right? Now, why would are they saying they're stupid? No, they're not saying that. However, there's a lot of people that are against immigrants. Some of those people that are against immigrants support slavery. Some of those that are against immigrants are against slavery. So what they do to not get people worked up, and so they don't argue, the only thing the Know Nothing Party will talk about is immigrants. So their official policy is, if you ask them like, hey, how do you feel about slavery? They have to say, I don't know. Like, how you feel about manifest destiny? And they're like, I don't know. How you feel about taxes? I don't know. How you feel about immigrants? Well, let me tell you one daggone thing about them immigrants. So the only thing that they will talk about is immigration because they don't want to divide their political party over all the other issues. So if you ask them anything else, they would respond with, I don't know. So the Know Nothings, right, are a one topic political party. All they want to deal with is immigration and just ignore everything else. This is a Know Nothing cartoon. So this is so the whiskey is supposed to represent the Irish. All right. Keep in mind, America, the Protestant upbringing likes pretend like that we don't drink a bunch of alcohol over here, even though like the Whiskey Rebellion proved that was wrong. But so whiskey is the Irish. It's supposed to represent the Irish, and then lager beer is supposed to represent the Germans. So the Irish and the Germans, they're running away with the ballot box. This is a nativist cartoon put out by the Know Nothings that basically say, left unchecked, the immigrants will show up and steal our elections. And we have to stop them because they're just leaving chaos behind them, and they're just going to steal the ballot boxes and run away and ruin America. All right, that's as far as we're going to get today. So I will see you guys tomorrow.